kept the secret for 8 months. 8 months of driving past the front gate every morning, nodding at my own reps passing signs, parking in the spot I designated for the ranch foreman, which was me, at least as far as she knew. My name is Richard. I'm 58 years old. I own a cattle ranch outside Bozeman, Montana. About 340 acres, a main house, 2 guest cabins, a working barn, and enough hay fields to keep 40 head comfortable through a hard winter. I built it over 30 years, starting with a beat-up pickup truck, a loan I couldn't really afford, and the kind of stubbornness my late father always said would either make me rich or kill me first. It almost killed me twice. Then it made me rich. I'm telling you this now because context matters. When you hear what happened, I want you to understand exactly what was at stake. And I want you to understand why I did what I did. Not because I was ashamed of what I had, but because I'd learned the hard way that money changes how people see you. Not always, but often enough. My first wife, Susan, passed away 11 years ago. Breast cancer, stage 4. We had 16 good years and then 3 very hard ones, and when it was over, I wasn't sure I'd ever want to be close to another person again. I threw myself into the ranch. I hired good people, expanded the herd, added a small agritourism operation, weekend guests, farm-to-table dinners, that kind of thing. It kept me busy. Busy is sometimes the only thing that gets you through. I wasn't looking for anyone when I met her. I was at a fundraiser dinner in town, the kind of thing my accountant tells me I should attend for community visibility, which I think is his way of making me feel useful at boring events. She was seated 2 chairs down from me. Her name was Brenda. She was 52, divorced, with a grown son named Kyle. Wait, I can't use that. Her son's name was Tanner. She had silver-streaked hair and a laugh that started quiet and then took over the whole room. We talked through dinner, through dessert, and through the parking lot afterward for another 40 minutes. I asked her to coffee the following week. She said yes. For the first few dates, I told her I worked on a ranch outside town, which was true. I let her assume I was employed there, which was letting her imagination do work. I didn't correct. I've thought about that a lot since. Whether that was dishonest from the start. I've decided it wasn't. Not yet. In those early weeks, I just wanted to be Richard. Not Richard who owns the land, just a man having coffee with a woman he found interesting. She seemed to like Richard who works on the ranch just fine. She'd been an office manager for a dental practice for 20 years. Her ex-husband had left her for someone younger, which she mentioned once, flatly, without drama, in a way that told me she'd already done her grieving and come out the other side. Her son Tanner was 26, living in Billings, working in sales. She talked about him with the particular mix of pride and exasperation that parents of adult children tend to have. We dated for 4 months before she asked me directly. We were sitting on the porch of a coffee shop downtown. It was October, cold enough for jackets, and she had her hands wrapped around her mug. She looked at me sideways and said, "You never talk about money. Are you doing okay?" I said I was fine. She said, "I'm not asking because I care about it. I'm asking because you seem careful about it. I'm asking because you seem careful about it. Like it's a sore subject." I thought about that for a moment. Then I said, "It's not a sore subject. I just think people lead with it too much. I'd rather you know me first." She nodded slowly. "That's either very healthy or very suspicious." I laughed. Probably a little of both. She let it go. That was one of the things I liked about her. She knew when to let things be. 4 more months passed. Things got serious. She met a few of my ranch hands, whom I'd quietly briefed. She saw the property. I drove her out one afternoon and introduced her as a friend, showed her the fields and the barn, told her I'd been the foreman there for several years. She seemed genuinely charmed by the place. She asked thoughtful questions about the cattle operation, about the guest program, about what winters were like out there. "You clearly love this place," she said. "I do," I said, which was the most honest thing I told her in months. She squeezed my hand. I should have told her then. I know that. I've replayed that moment probably 200 times. The sun was going down over the western ridge, painting everything amber, and she was looking at me like I was worth something, and I knew that it was time. But I didn't say it. I told myself I would. Soon. Soon became February. We'd been together 8 months. I took her to dinner in town, the nicer place on Main Street, white tablecloths, the kind of menu that lists the name of the farm where the beef was raised. I was going to tell her that night. I had the whole thing planned out in my head. I was going to say, "There's something I should have told you months ago, and I'm sorry I waited, and I hope you'll understand why." I didn't get the chance. Her son Tanner was at the bar when we walked in. He was with two friends, and they'd been there a while based on the volume of the conversation. He came over to say hello, and we did the obligatory introductions, and then he said to me, not her, looking me up and down, "So you're the ranch hand my mom's been seeing." I said that was right. He smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Must be nice having someone take you out for a nice dinner." His mother told him that was enough. He shrugged and went back to the bar. She was quiet for a moment after we sat down. Then she said, "I'm sorry about that. He's been a little protective since the divorce." I said it was fine, but something had shifted in me, not against her, against the situation. I needed to fix it. I needed to stop letting people fill in the blanks with their own assumptions. 2 weeks later, I sat her down in my kitchen, my actual kitchen, in my actual house, where she'd been spending weekends for the past 2 months without knowing it was mine, and I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "This house?" I said, "Yes." "The whole ranch?" I said, "Yes." "You've owned it this whole time?" I said, "Yes." I said I was sorry. I told her about Susan, about what I'd seen money do to relationships, about wanting to be sure she saw me and not the land. I told her I understood if she was angry. I told her I understood if she needed time. She sat there with her hands flat on the table, and she looked at me for what felt like a full minute without saying anything. Then she said, "You should have told me." I said I knew. She said, "But I understand why you didn't." We talked for 3 hours that night. It wasn't easy. She was hurt, genuinely hurt, that I hadn't trusted her sooner. I took that seriously. I didn't make excuses. I just listened, and I owned it. By the end of the night, she said she needed a few days to think. She came back after 4 days. She said she decided that a man who was careful about who he let close wasn't a red flag. It was, she said, considering what had happened to both of us, probably just smart. I proposed 6 months later. She said yes. We got married the following spring, small ceremony. Her sister and my 2 ranch hands as witnesses. A dinner at the main house afterward with about 30 people. It was the kind of wedding I would have planned for myself if I'd been planning it, which I realize isn't something every man can say. I was happy. Genuinely, quietly happy in a way I hadn't expected to feel again. The first month was fine. The second month, things started to shift. It started with small things. Brenda asked about the ranch's finances, specifically about refinancing options on the property. I thought it was casual curiosity at first. I explained that the ranch had no mortgage. I'd paid it off 12 years ago. She seemed surprised. Then, a few days later, she asked if I'd ever thought about adding her name to the deed. I said that was something we should probably talk through carefully, maybe with my attorney. She said, "Why do you need an attorney? We're married." I said that's exactly why, actually. Getting it right legally matters more when you're married. She let it go for about 2 weeks. Then Tanner arrived. He drove up from Billings on a Friday evening unannounced. I found out because one of my ranch hands, a 20-year employee named Pete, who'd been with me since before Susan died, called me on my cell while I was in town picking up supplies. Pete said, "There's a young man here saying his mother asked him to look around the property. Should I let him?" I said no. I said to be polite but firm. By the time I got back, Tanner was sitting in the kitchen with his mother. He looked at me with that same flat smile from the restaurant. "Great place," he said. "Really something." I said thank you. That night after he left, Brenda came to me with something that didn't feel like a question. She said she'd been thinking, and that she felt it would make sense for Tanner to come work on the ranch. Help manage the guest program. He was good with people, she said. It would give him a fresh start. I asked what was wrong with his current job in Billings. She said he wasn't happy there. I said I understood that, but we hadn't talked about bringing on new staff, and I'd need to think about it. "He's my son," she said. "I know," I said. "And this is my business." She went cold after that. Not screaming, not dramatic, just cold. She stopped coming to dinner. She spent more time on her phone. When I'd come in from the barn, she'd be in the middle of conversations that she'd end quickly when she heard me come in. "I want to be honest with you about something," I didn't want to believe what I was starting to suspect. I'd been careful, 8 months of careful, all that groundwork, and I still found myself sitting in my own barn at 10 o'clock at night wondering if I'd been played, wondering if the woman whose laugh I'd loved across a fundraiser dinner table had just been patient. I want to believe I was wrong. I still want to believe that. But then I found the papers. I wasn't snooping. I need to be clear about that. She had been using the desk in the second bedroom as a workspace, and I went in there to get a stapler for something. I know how that sounds, but it's the truth, and there was a document on the desk, not hidden, just sitting there. It was a printout from a Montana family law website. The page was about marital property rights, specifically about how a spouse can petition for an interest in property that has been actively managed and maintained with their labor or financial contribution during a marriage. She had underlined 2 sentences. I stood there for a moment. I put the stapler back and I walked outside and I stood in the cold for about 15 minutes looking at the mountains. Then I called my attorney. His name is Douglas. Wait, Douglas is in the file. His name is Philip. No, that's in the file too. His name is Stuart. I've worked with Stuart for 19 years. I told him what I'd found. He told me to come in Monday. Monday. Stuart laid it out plainly. Brenda had not contributed financially to the ranch. We had been married for 3 months. In Montana, premarital property remains separate unless there is meaningful financial commingling or unless both parties agree in writing to change the title. The underlined sentences on that printout were technically true but highly inapplicable to our situation. She would have needed to demonstrate years of contribution, and even then it would be a stretch, he said. She might not know that, or she might be testing the waters. I asked what he recommended. He said, talk to her, but come back here first with every document you have proving sole ownership before you do. I spent that week pulling together records. Deed of purchase from 1994. Mortgage payoff confirmation from 2012. Every tax return, every property tax receipt, every business license. If she was going to try to make a case that this was somehow jointly ours, I was going to have 30 years of paper saying otherwise. I also had a conversation with Pete. Pete told me that Tanner had called the ranch twice that week asking about the operation, how many employees, what the guest program revenue looked like, whether the grazing lease on the adjacent parcel was in my name or a separate LLC. The grazing lease was in a separate LLC that only Stuart and my accountant knew about. I don't know how Tanner knew to ask about it. When I got home that Thursday evening, Brenda was in the living room. She had a look on her face I hadn't seen before. Not cold, not warm. Calculating, I think, like she was deciding something. She said she wanted to talk about our future on the property. I sat down. I told her I wanted to talk about that too. She said she'd been thinking about her long-term security. She said that at her age, she needed to know that she'd be taken care of. She said she felt that the fairest thing would be to put her name on the deed. Not half, she said, just a portion. 20%, she said, was reasonable given that she was contributing to the household and the property. I asked what she was contributing. She looked at me like the question was offensive. I said I wasn't trying to be harsh, I was genuinely asking. She said she cooked, she cleaned, she helped host the weekend guests. I said that I appreciated all of that, and that we could talk about compensation for the guest hosting work specifically, but that adding her name to the deed of a property I'd owned for 30 years wasn't something I was prepared to do. She said, I'm your wife. I said, I know, and I love you, but this isn't how that works. She stood up, and what she said next, I want you to understand that I'm not exaggerating, because I've gone over it in my head enough times that I could repeat it word for word. She said, if you won't put me on the deed, I want a divorce, and I'll be contacting an attorney about my rights to this property. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, okay. She blinked. I think she expected more resistance. I said, I want you to know that I take this seriously. I'm not going to pretend this doesn't hurt, but I'm also not going to be told that my home of 30 years is a negotiating chip. She said she wasn't leaving until this was resolved. I said she was welcome to stay in the guest cabin while we sorted things out, but that she wouldn't be staying in the main house. That's when her voice went up. She said the main house was as much hers as mine. She said her attorney would have something to say about that. She called Tanner, I could hear her in the other room, and said, "He's not budging, and we may need to move faster. We may need to move faster. We may need to move faster." I want you to sit with that phrase for a second, because I did. I sat with it for a long time. I called Stuart the next morning. He filed paperwork the following week. The divorce petition cited irreconcilable differences. Stuart also sent a letter to Brenda's attorney. She had retained one, it turned out, within 48 hours of our conversation, outlining the complete ownership history of the property, the applicable Montana statutes, and a very clear statement that any claims against premarital separate property would be contested with 30 years of documentation and, if necessary, litigation. Her attorney took 3 weeks to respond. The response was not what Brenda had been hoping for, I suspect. Her own attorney told her in writing that the claim against the property was unlikely to succeed, given the ownership timeline and the absence of any financial contribution on her part. The attorney suggested she seek a fair settlement of marital assets accumulated during the marriage, which amounted to about 9 months of joint living expenses, a jointly purchased living room couch, and one vacation we'd taken to Colorado in the fall. The couch cost $800. I said she could have it. The divorce was finalized 5 months later. It was not pleasant. There were some ugly exchanges, mostly to returnees. Tanner sent me a hostile text message that I screenshotted and sent to Stuart without responding. Brenda, to her credit, eventually accepted the settlement without going to trial. I think because her attorney had made it clear to her that she wasn't going to win. She moved back to town. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she and Tanner had moved in together in an apartment and that she'd gone back to work at the dental office. I don't know what she told people about what happened. I know what I would have told people if I'd been her. I know what the truth is. Here's what I keep coming back to. Not the anger. The anger faded mostly. What I keep coming back to is the fundraiser dinner. That first night, her laugh that started quiet and then took over the room. I keep wondering when that changed, or if it ever was what I thought it was. I keep wondering if the version of Brenda I fell in love with was real and if she made a choice at some point, or if I was a target from the beginning. I don't know. I probably never will. My therapist. Yes, I see a therapist. I started after Susan died, and I've kept going. And I'd recommend it to any man over 50 who thinks he doesn't need one. My therapist says the uncertainty is the hardest part. She says most people want a clean story. Either she was a con artist from day one, or she genuinely loved me and greed got in the way. The truth, she says, is probably messier than either version. I think she's right. Pete is still here. He's been here 22 years now. After everything settled down, he came up to me one morning while I was checking the fence line along the north pasture. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "You doing all right?" I said I was getting there. He nodded. He said, "This place is still here." I looked out at the fields, the winter grass coming back, the mountains white above the tree line, the same view I'd had for 30 years. And I thought, yes, it is. Nobody took it. Nobody tricked it away from me. I still had the thing I'd built with my own hands, and the people who'd helped me build it, and the memory of the woman I'd loved and lost honestly. He was right. This place was still here. I won't be rushing into anything again. That's not bitterness. It's just honesty. I'm 58 years old, and I've loved 2 women in my life, and I know what it's supposed to feel like. If it ever comes around again, I'll know. I'll still be careful. But I'll also tell her about the ranch sooner than 8 months in. Some lessons you only need to learn once. If you're watching this from somewhere, and you've been through something like this, I just want you to know, protecting what you've built is not the same as being closed off. Knowing your worth, the legal kind and the personal kind, is not greed, and loving someone carefully, after you've already lost someone you loved, is not a character flaw. It's just what you do when the thing matters. Comment the city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story has traveled. I've thought a lot about what it means to reap what you sow. Not in any religious sense. I'm not a churchy man and I don't believe in cosmic scorecards. But I do believe that the choices a person makes, repeated over time, build a kind of architecture around them. And, eventually, they have to live inside what they built. Brenda made choices. Small ones, at first. The quiet questions about refinancing, the visit from Tanner, the printout left on the desk. Maybe she told herself those were reasonable things for a wife to look into. Maybe she genuinely believed she was entitled to what she was reaching for. I don't know, but each choice led to the next one. And by the time she sat across from me and said, "I want a divorce and I'll be contacting an attorney about my rights to this property," she had built herself into a corner she couldn't walk back out of. That's not karma. That's just math. What I keep returning to, the thing that feels most true when I'm honest with myself, is that intelligence in a situation like that isn't about being suspicious of everyone. It's about being clear-eyed. There's a difference. Suspicious means you're looking for threats everywhere, which makes you bitter and closed, and eventually wrong just as often as you're right. Clear-eyed means you watch what people do, not just what they say, and you trust the pattern more than the moment. I was clear-eyed for 8 months before I married her. I stopped being clear-eyed after. That was my failure. Not the secrecy about the ranch, but the way I let my guard down completely once the ring was on her finger, as if the marriage certificate was a guarantee of character. It isn't. Nothing is. People show you who they are, slowly, and you have to keep paying attention even when you'd rather not. The resilience part, and I think about this a lot when I'm out working a fence line by myself, is that getting hurt doesn't have to make you smaller. It can, if you let it. I've seen men come out of bad situations and spend the rest of their lives punishing everyone around them for something one person did. That's a kind of slow self-destruction that doesn't announce itself as what it is. It just looks like being careful. Protecting yourself. Until one day you realize you've been alone for 15 years and you call it wisdom instead of fear. I'm not going to do that. Pete's still here. The land's still here. I still wake up before sunrise and walk out to the barn and watch the sky go pink over the western ridge and feel, despite everything, like I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. That's not nothing. In fact, I think that might be everything. If you take one thing from what I've shared today, let it be this. Protect what you've built, not because you're afraid of losing it, but because you earned it. Your work, your judgment, your willingness to keep going after loss. Those things have value. They deserve to be treated carefully, and the person worth sharing them with will understand that. They won't ask you to hand over the deed. They'll ask how they can help take care of the place. There's a difference. And you're allowed to know it.